One thing as a resident set designer, meaning that, I design shows specifically for this one theater. One thing that I think is important and I've tried to do in that setting is to not develop a style. I don't want somebody to walk in and be like, oh, that's a Derek set. Like some designers, like if you're a freelance designer, like you can do that, because people will seek you out for that style. They can think like, I'm doing this show and what do I want it to be? Like, oh, this one set designer designs in a style that I think will work really well for that show. But when you're a resident set designer, in my mind, like you don't necessarily want to develop a style. You want to keep each show um, fresh and different from all the other ones you've done before.
Hey, honestly, thank you for being here. Thank you
Yeah,
for
no problem.
doing this. We're exploring the how Barter Theatre was able to maintain such a huge body of work over several years and still do pretty excellent work.
Yeah.
When did you first start at Barter? How did you get it? When and then how did you get involved?
Um, my first job at Barter was an unpaid internship in the summer of 2002. It's in between my junior and senior year in college. And that kind of ties into how I got started. One of the things that I had to do for my college curriculum was to do an internship. And I had a professor who was kind of like my mentor when I was in college. And his background was actually in set design. And so he's the one that even like had me thinking about like taking my painting education and turning it into a theater career. And so I I was, how old was I then? 22 years old and didn't know any better. Like I emailed Rick Rose directly, like, "Hey, I need an internship." um, and so and so he passed it on to the technical director. I didn't hear anything back, so I emailed Rick again. I'm like, "Hey, I haven't heard anything." So yeah, I was an unpaid intern in the scene shop, doing a lot of construction more so than painting. The one painting thing I had for Barter was painting the truck that they used for load ends, the old beast as they called it. So that was a fun project. So that's how I got started at Barter. And it happened that when I was there that summer for my internship, the assistant scenic artist decided to move back to a theater closer to her home. And so Barter was gracious enough to kind of hold the job for me until I went back to school and graduated in a year. And so yeah, I graduated college with a job. Wasn't I think I was like the only painting major leaving my school at the time that actually had a job doing painting. That wasn't like a record store manager or a bartender or something like that.
Wow. And you said you were 22 years old?
Yeah,
And when was this? About what year?
2002.
Oh, wow. And it being 2021, it's been 19 years.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Almost half my life.
You graduated from college and your degree is in painting or graphic arts?
Fine art painting.
Who was the resident scenic designer when you graduated and came on full time?
Cherry Pro Duval.
Okay.
And when I started full time, I was the assistant scenic artist, so I was just painting scenery at that point. Well, um, honestly, when I came back full time as an assistant scenic artist, my first day that I started, my boss, the technical director, came to me. He's like, "Oh yeah, by the way, we've decided that the assistant scenic artist part of their job description is going to be designing all of the player shows, which the player shows, as you know, are the young acting company, sort of the shows that are more geared towards school age children." So that was a curveball I wasn't quite ready for. So it was kind of like, hey, oh, and here, by the way, here's your first script, and you're already late. So Anne of Green Gables, I'll never forget it. Wow, yeah,
And that was your first set design.
yeah. And I had no idea what I was doing. I leaned on Cherry a lot for that one because I had no idea what a ground plan was. Like I had no idea about any of it really. So yeah, it was kind of a not necessarily a trial by fire, but definitely learning on the job, like learning everything on the job when it comes to set design.
But you said your boss was the technical director.
Yeah, I mean, in the shop, the structure was, I guess my first boss, direct boss was the scenic artist at the time. His name was Dr. Mullins. He was my direct boss, and then the technical director, Mark Duvall, was sort of over the entire shop.
So Anne of Green Gables was your first set design, and the rest is history.
Yeah, and it was huge for a player show. Like looking back on it now, like, oh my god, the set was so huge for a player show. It worked, but it was it was probably definitely maybe a little bit outside of the typical scope of a player show in hindsight.
Well, did it tour?
No, no, no. It only played in stage two
Okay.
or Smith Theater now. Sorry, Smith Theater. That's a hard habit to break.
If you were to estimate how many set designs did you have you done for Barter? Just for Barter.
Yeah, I mean, if you counting player shows, it's definitely over 100. If you count the Moonlight shows that we're doing now and full production Barter shows, I think it's 91 or 92 now. But if you throw the player shows in there too, it's definitely well over 100. Since 2012, I've done 92.
So pretty much over the last 9 years, you've done an average of 10 shows per year.
Yeah, and that's with taking a 1 year sabbatical also. So subtract one of
Ooh.
those years.
Yeah, we're going to have to talk about that. So your background is but your background is in painting and graphic arts. Why did you get into that? Why did you get into the arts in the first place?
um, well, I mean, I guess it always started like, I mean, even from a child, like I was always drawing or whatever. I went to college in 1998, and my original major that I, claimed going in as my freshman year was recording studio sound design. Imagine that, Tony.
Is
Um,
that right?
yeah, yeah. I wanted to work in the music business. And I think it was the night before or 2 nights before my first freshman year classes started. Like I realized, like I don't want to do that. like, um, it really became a question of like, what do I want to do, and really, what do I have to do? Like, art is something that I have to do. And so yeah, like the night before my first classes started, I changed my major to art, changed all my classes, and then yeah, I went from there. I mean, it turned out the school that I was at the time, their art department wasn't accredited, so I stayed there for a semester, left, came back home, did a lot of my core classes, stayed home for a year and a half, and did a lot of my core classes in a community college just to get those out of the way because it's a lot cheaper than paying for English one in a private school versus a community college is astronomically cheaper. So I stayed here and did that, and then sort of tried to figure out where I wanted to go, and really settled on Savannah College of Art and Design. One, because it was a fairly new school then, but had a lot of buzz and growth around it. And it's Savannah, Georgia. Like it's absolutely beautiful there. The beach is right there. So I mean, yeah, my decision wasn't that hard when it came down to figuring out where to go.
Well, what was that like? Now, actually, I want to jump on. You said something. Art is something that you have to do.
Yeah, it's
What
always
do
something
you
I've had to do.
what do you mean by that? Why why do you have to do it?
I mean, I think it's just how I cope with the world and express my thoughts on anything and everything. Some people write, some people make music. It's just how I express the things that I feel that I can't put into words, if that makes sense. Yeah, it's just always been something that I've had to do.
Yeah, I completely understand about expressing things that aren't literal. You can't put them into words because they are not literal.
Right.
There
I mean, I guess
are
poets can. I mean, poets can. That's I consider that a way of putting things into words that can't otherwise be described. But yeah, I'm just not very good at that. So
Yeah, that's a good point, but it's still a rhetorical medium.
yeah,
You're expressing things that cannot be expressed in with words.
At least I can. Yeah.
Yeah, same with me. As a sound designer, I express things in music, and musicians express things that cannot be expressed with the right brain wherever the language center is in the brain, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I completely understand that. And I'm very interested in the connection between mindset and creativity. And mindset, by mindset, I mean, your beliefs on what's possible in the world and what you are capable of.
Okay.
So when you were the assistant scenic artist and your boss said, "All right, Mr. Painter, by the way, you're also designing all the sets for the Barter player shows." What went through your head? I mean, in terms of mindset, what was your mindset?
um, it's a long time ago. It's hard to really remember. I think my mindset was just like, okay, like let's figure this out. Like I saw it as an opportunity too, and like looking back on it now, like thank God that was my job then. Like, I don't know what I would be doing now if that hadn't been in some ways thrust upon me.
Because not everybody would have just rolled up their sleeves and figured out how to do it. Some people would have said, "I can't do this," and failed, or let it not happen, or quit. But you didn't.
Well, if I knew more about theater at the time, that might have been. I knew absolutely nothing about theater when I started. Like stage right, what's that? Like proscenium, what is this crazy word you're talking about? I knew absolutely nothing, and some might say I still don't, but I've learned a little bit.
I remember I came to you and said, "Okay, on the Barter stage, which is now Gillum stage, what's lane one? What's lane two? What's lane three?" So I remember having to ask you that, and you just can't be afraid to ask those things. And
Yeah,
some people are going to laugh at you kind-heartedly,
yeah, who cares?
but yeah, who cares? I mean, that's my perspective. Who cares? I don't know. I got to find out. And that's the growth mindset,
Yeah,
which is about learning, which is about I can do anything. I can learn anything I set my mind to.
yeah.
In 2019, you probably did 10 shows. How have your set designs changed?
You know, I don't know how much they've changed. One thing as a resident set designer, meaning that I design shows specifically for this one theater. One thing that I think is important, and I've tried to do in that setting, is to not develop a style. I don't want somebody to walk in and be like, "Oh, that's a Derek set." Like some designers, like if you're a freelance designer, like you can do that, because people will seek you out for that style. They can think like, I'm doing this show, and what do I want it to be? Like, oh, this one set designer designs in a style that I think will work really well for that show. But when you're a resident set designer, in my mind, like you don't necessarily want to develop a style. You want to keep each show um, fresh and different from all the other ones you've done before. To a certain extent, I mean, that being said, like, if it's a box interior, like it's a box interior, like you can change it up and put your own flair or design uh, aesthetic onto it. But yeah, to answer your question, like I don't really know how my designs have changed over the years. Like they've certainly probably gotten um, like my drafting skills have probably gotten better. TDs probably enjoy that. But in terms of like the actual design, it's really just coming into each show with a fresh mind and listening to the director and their thoughts and trying to interpret that into something visual that matches their vision for the show, and can also enhance and play along well with the other designs like costume, sound, lights. Yeah, so I don't know how my designs have changed.
Yeah, well, that's a something that's very different from somebody who might have stuck with painting,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Because the theater is is cool because it's such a collaborative art. But I want to get back to what you said, something very interesting. You try not to develop a style. What do you mean by style?
What I mean by style is, I mean, there's certain designers and designers that, are freelance designers that design shows for barter also that have, a fairly distinct style that, you can walk into the theater and see the set and I can tell who designed it. And maybe you can do that with mine. I don't know. But like it's, and not to say that that's a bad thing. Having your own style is great, and I'm sure I have a certain amount of it, but it's something that I try to make each design different from something that I've done in the past, if that
Is
makes any sense.
is that because you don't want it to become stale?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I would say that's accurate. Yeah. And I mean, and thinking back to your earlier question about how my designs have changed, it kind of ties into that, but not a direct answer to that question. The more you do something, the more you learn about it, the easier it is for it to become formulaic. And that's something that I fight. Like, I think, to answer your question, like when I first started designing, like all things were possible. Like, I didn't really, for better or for worse, I didn't really, when I first started designing, didn't really necessarily worry myself with um, the reality of pulling something off. Like, it was really just all about the art, and trying to make some really cool art that would work for the show. But the more I've designed, I've realized the not necessarily the limitations, but when you design something, what you're asking other people to do, and that weighs into it. I don't want to design something that is impossible for our shops to produce or impossible for our crews to rep. Um, so in that aspect, at least my approach has changed a little bit, and I think for the better. Like, I still, in my mind, art always wins. Form versus functionality. Like in theater, functionality is incredibly important, but in the initial design process, form always wins in my mind until reality sets function in.
Okay, that makes sense. So you identify your constraints, some might say.
Yeah.
And so you have a better understanding over doing it 10 times a year since 2012. You have a better understanding of what those constraints are.
Yeah,
But
that.
within those constraints,
Mhm.
do you ever say, because what you said, form takes precedent over function? Within those constraints, do you ever say, I don't know how they're going to pull it off, but let's see if we can?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I can think of a few shows that are like that.
Tell me.
Oh gosh, Midsummer, those trees for Midsummer, like I had no idea what that was going to look like until we put it up in the theater. Like, that's probably the first show that I designed that, like, I could see it in my head, but I had no idea what it was going to look like in reality until, I mean, it was trees made out of pool noodles and foliage made out of like Dixie cups painted green, cut in half and attached to chicken wire and hung from the grid. Like, I was like, I have no idea what this is gonna look like.
Wow.
But it turned out great. Like, it's one of my favorite shows I've ever designed is Midsummer. So that was one. And like, I have a better understanding now of when I'm asking the shop to do something that's outside of their comfort zone. And so I know, going into it, like, talk to the TD, like, okay, this one's going to be, we're about to talk about this one because I don't know if this is possible or not. So, but luckily, I've always had, been lucky enough to have really good working relationships with the TDs that I've worked with, at Barter, and know that we can sit down and have a conversation, and know that, all of them that I've worked with, I know that when they set limitations on something, it's based in reality and not just because they don't want to do it. If that makes sense.
What is the effect of the longevity of the tech director and you working together? How does that? Do you think that supports the vision? or do you think there's a danger of getting stale?
No, I think it absolutely supports the art. Knowing, like, having a long standing relationship with the technical directors, knowing that, when I go to ask them something or they come to ask me something, that I can trust what they're saying, if that makes sense. And they can trust what I'm asking. Another huge aspect of set design and art for theater and art in general, is budgetary concerns. And I try, in the initial design phase, I try to be considerate of the budget and knowing what it is, but also at the same time, it can't be the leading decision maker. I'm sorry, my dog is barking got crazy. Will
It's
you shut
okay.
up? I was in the middle of a really good answer. God damn it.
I know it's very erudite.
All right, sorry about that.
Yeah, that's no problem. In fact, I don't care. It's your dog, man. I almost asked you, bring the dog up, show the dog.
No.
I came on as resident sound designer in 2015, and you and I have worked very closely over the years. And I really love this thing. I really want to explore what you said about trying not to develop a specific style. Is that because you want to honor each production on its own merits?
Yeah, that's part of it. And part of it comes back to just how I am as an artist in general. I've never really I've developed styles, but I never stick with a certain style for very long. Like I develop a body of work and painting, and I'll explore it as far as I need to, and then I'll scrap that idea and start something new. It's just a way of keeping it fresh for me. And that's something that's incredibly important to me creatively. Like, my creative well isn't bottomless. I have to almost sort of invent ways to keep the art and the act of making the art fresh for myself. Because even set design, painting, whatever art I've done, the finished product isn't the most important thing to me. The most important thing to me has always been the process of creating it. And I have to keep that process fresh and vibrant and enjoyable. As soon as I lose the joy in the process, then I have to change things up.
How do you do that? How do you keep it fresh and enjoyable?
In terms of set design, I just change my process up. I don't start the same way every time. And a lot of that depends on, the show itself and what the show sparks in my mind, and that will sort of guide the process. But at the same time, like, sometimes I start with a model. Like, I just start building a model. Sometimes I start with the ground plan. Sometimes I start with a sketch. Just because I don't want that process I don't want to become a mechanic, if that makes any sense. Like, I don't want to, and I don't mean to deride mechanics, but like,
It would be very easy for it to become formulaic, and you're
mhm,
just pumping it out.
yeah,
And anybody who has a commitment to their art and their profession has to be on guard.
yeah,
And that's why I keep harping on this, because I think it's a really important point. This work ethic, this commitment to your artistic um, standards. And
mhm,
that's the whole point of this series that we're doing on Barter, is how do you sustain that? How do you sustain that over years?
yeah.
Your artistic, the production values, the high artistic values. That's the exciting part.
I will say, in terms of the formulaic thing, like, um, been blessed at Barter with some really great leaders. And I'll say, anytime that I sort of let the process become formulaic on a show, I got called out for it, not because of it being formulaic, but it showed in the design itself. And so, like, those designs never made it to stage. Like, I would, present a design for approval or whatever. And if it was, and without a doubt, anytime that I'll let it become formulaic, that design got scrapped. Um,
Can you think of an example?
and I'll say Christmas Carol. The initial designs for that were a little formulaic in terms of the process, but we didn't actually scrap the entire design.
What
Sat
year?
down with 2016,
Okay.
15 or 16. And Rick Rose was directing that show. So we sat down with an initial light model, and we didn't
And what's
scrap.
a model? Just for people who might not know, what do you mean by model?
A model is they're typically built in half-inch scale or quarter-inch scale. That means that a quarter-inch equals a foot or a half-inch equals a foot. I build mine in quarter-inch equals a foot scale, and they're three-dimensional models of what the set will look like. It's a small, tiny version of what um, the actual set will look like on stage. Um, so yeah, Christmas Carol, like I got an initial design done. And Rick and other directors at Barter are really great. I can show them initial ideas and be like, what do you think about where this is going? Instead of spending all the time fully realizing design and then having to change it. So we sat down with it, and, like, we found parts of it that were cool and that we liked. And then, it ended up turning into like that giant clockwork, never always moving thing that it became. And I love that set. Like, if it wasn't for that collaboration, that set wouldn't have been anything near what it was like. And it's probably one of my favorite and most successful designs I've done at Barter was that show.
I love that set too. I thought it was magnificent. One of my favorite set designs of yours.
And
What are
that's
some other
another
good ones?
aspect of Bart, or that's another aspect of theater in general that, was new to me starting in theater, coming from a fine art background. It's just you're alone in your studio making art. In theater, it's a very collaborative process. And really it's one of the amazing things about theater. It's why the art can achieve the levels that it achieves, is that, it's not just my idea. It's my name in the program listed as set designer, but it's never only my idea. So just being open and receptive to that collaborative process, and listening to your directors and artistic directors, and following their lead. It can take things to places you never could have imagined a design or a work of art going to.
Yeah, quickly walk us through that process.
Okay.
So you read the script at the beginning of the year. It's a script you've never seen on stage and never heard of before.
Mhm.
Start there. Then what do you do?
um,
What are your habits?
well, so typically, we'll have an initial production meeting, and about these. We're all there, all the designers and the director are there. And the director sort of presents his or her vision for the show, and then we all kind of go back to our offices and start working. And like I said before, like, my process is never the same. Sometimes I'll start with a sketch. Sometimes I'll start with a model. Sometimes I'll start, anywhere, ground plan, whatever.
Well, let's talk about big fish. Let's talk about it in the specific, since it
Okay.
varies from. Oh, actually, let's talk about something wicked. This way comes. Since it's probably better to talk about something specific, since it changes from show to show.
Yeah. Oh, I'm trying
So
to
we
think.
went to the production meeting. Did you have any idea of what you wanted to do before you talked to Rick?
No, no, not with that show. Because I mean, that show, um, script wise, is written very.
It's weird
It's
for a
written,
play. It's
yeah.
outside of what.
Well, and it's written like a film. It's like, you go here and you go here and you go here, all these different places. And my first thought on reading was like, how are we going to create all these places on stage? Like, and I have that thought with a lot of scripts. Like, it's like, oh my gosh, how are we going to, yeah. So yeah, we had that initial meeting. And I'm trying to remember how I started that one. I think that one started with a sketch, but then given the structure of what the set was, it was really sort of hard to tell from the sketch um, what I really had in mind, what I really had envisioned. So then I had to build um, a white model. And what a white model is the same thing as any other scale model, but it's all the pieces are white. There's no color information at all. It's just really about the structure. Because it was really hard to describe or portray that structure in this 2D sketch form. So yeah, I built a white model for that show, and then Rick and I met and looked at it, and really not a whole lot changed from that model to the finished product. The model was really just about the base structure, the overall structure of what you see when you walk into the theater. It didn't really necessarily have all of the small pieces that were added and subtracted for each individual scene, but I really wanted to make sure we had that overall basic structure down first, because that would inform what we could do for all the rest of the show.
And what was the main idea? Was there one main idea for it, or?
Well, it was kind of based off of um, almost like circus sideshow attraction. Sort of what you would see without any sort of specific signage. There wasn't any like bearded lady or anything like that, but based off of the structure of a circus sideshow, and really just kind of trying to capture the feel of this kind of dark, demented circus that came to that town.
And in it, there's a scene where a evil balloon passes by.
Mm-hmm.
When you read that, how did you come up with the solution? I mean, I
Yeah,
mean, it. This was a helium balloon, not a helium balloon, but this was a balloon that people ride in.
right.
It's
Yeah,
a huge balloon. It's not like a little toy balloon
yeah,
that a
yeah,
kid would have.
yeah. Um, I had no idea how we were going to pull that off. Because sometimes doing things like that in a literal sense can come across as pretty hokey. And that's not what we wanted for the show at all. And I think we actually ended up like it was just a lighting trick. I think, I can't remember specifically, but I think it was kind of like, he turned lights off across the stage. So you kind of got this shadow moving across the stage.
And
Um,
there was this, yeah, and we added the sound of hot air being
yeah,
released and hot air being injected into the balloon from
yeah.
the stove.
So luckily I didn't have to solve that problem. You and lights had to solve that problem.
Well, I mean, but I was told, okay, this is how we're going to do that. But
Yeah.
you and Rick had to come up with how to do that. How did you come to that decision, if you can remember?
I can't remember specifically. I know we talked about it. And I think he said like, we'll just find a way to do that with lights. Because he was of the same mindset that I was, that trying to do anything physically with something on stage would just be kind of hokey and pull people out of the reality of the show. If we had like a balloon basket going across the stage in that moment of the show, it would just in some shows that works well. Like we did that for Wizard of Oz. We actually fly in a basket and fly it out. And also budget becomes an issue. Like you have to, if you're going to fly something, that's a whole another ball of wax when it comes to money and experts and etc. And given the structure of the set, there wasn't any good way to fly anything across it. um, so yeah, we decided fairly early on that that was going to be um, a trick pulled off with lights and sound, and that we would put all of our efforts into the other scenes that were a little bit more at least grounded on stage level.
But it was a very interesting and beautiful moment, which made it artistic.